Hello friends, I'm Vladimir Vasiliev and I'm happy to welcome you back to my channel. Unfortunately, we haven't been uploading for a long time, and there's a pretty compelling reason for that, but life returns, so we decided to come back after all and try a whole new format on my channel. We are going to interview a real fighter pilot flying Su-27s, so it's going to be a new format, and I hope you like it. Meet our guest. Today I have a guest on my channel, actually a very remarkable young man that I'm proud of and glad I know him. His name is Andrei. Can you introduce yourself, please? I fly fighter jets and I'm a combat pilot. My type endorsement is mostly Su-27s. He is a fantastic man who flies amazing airplanes, and you know, I always admire these planes, watching a lot of Ukrainian and foreign machines. But I used to be able to have a heart-to-heart talk about them, about how they fly, mostly when the old pilots told me about it. Now I see a young guy who can tell me what it all looks like. It's the first experience ever. Why a fighter pilot? First and foremost, I wanted to protect my country, my homeland, and family and friends. Sure, girls are another good reason for this. Yes, they love fighter pilots. Just like that? Well, that doesn't sound very kind to us. I'm a pilot too. It was my dream. I wanted to be a fighter pilot for a long time, since the 7th grade. I was a rather slack learner until 7th grade, and then I decided to fly fighters. I wanted to shoot for the stars. I started studying hard and went to university to become a fighter pilot, and only on this plane, and only a fighter. I went for a ride in a plane once, and I realized that this feeling of freedom, a hint of something otherworldly, allured me. Yet again, it's both freedom and military service, so how do you combine these two contrasting terms? Well, where aviation begins, we all know that saying. Getting pilots to obey is like herding cats. Yes, exactly, that's it. What was the first plane you ever flew? It was a Has-30, Kharkiv-made plane. I was 21 at the time and it was incredible. I still remember that emotion, that freedom. You know, flying with an instructor is one thing, and without one is a different experience. Do you mean your next immediate step was flying a jet? Then we studied a jet, and there was the L-39. The next stage was a fighter jet, and we were the first group to fly the Su-27 straight following the L-39. Was it a two-seater initially? No, not at all, right away on the fighters. As a cadet, I used to shoot down targets over the Black Sea. Is the Su-27 a boy or a girl? Of course it's male, because he has his temper. And what's that, an arrogant one? Yes, very arrogant, compared to other planes, indeed. And the girl is what? The girl is, let's equip a MiG-29. How much of a fan is to feel this power? Well, when you accelerate, bring the revs to the maximum, you're pressed against your seat very hard. It's like driving a Porsche. When you take off in it and start maneuvering, there is nothing on earth like this. Speed, altitude, and G-forces boost your adrenaline like hell. Is it an Afterburner? Yes. When do you use it? In peacetime, we use Afterburner for training purposes, for aerobatics. We use it almost all the time in combat because you need to dodge missiles. To do that, you need excessive thrust and power. When dodging missiles, we turn the Afterburner on. Okay, you have a thrust-to-weight ratio about 1 here, don't you? Yes. Can you go vertically upwards on the Afterburner? With a certain amount of fuel, yes, because it takes a lot of fuel, and once there comes the point where the thrust is greater than the plane's weight. Okay, Su-27 and MiG-29, what's the difference? There's not much difference. What does differ is the fuel amount. As the war revealed, there are small advantages of the MiG-29, but the difference is not significant. They are the same type, but the fueling matters a lot. Specifically, the MiG-29 has almost half as much fuel, and to do the tasks that we need to do, we hand an extra fuel tank that can be either dropped or not, with reduced in-flight loads. However, there are some nuances to it, and we can stay airborne a lot longer, have a longer range, longer combat operations with a greater reach. Okay, Su-27, how far can you fly it? Theoretically, we have a maximum flight time of 5 hours, and the full tank is enough for 2.5 hours of active combat. It depends on the mission, but on average, 1.5 to 2.5 hours available. 2.5 hours? No more. When's the adrenaline peak? As strange as it sounds when you go to the plane, because you get emotional. You don't always know your combat mission goal. Most of the tasks are delivered when we're already in the air. Obviously, when you have already taken off, you feel more freedom. You already have a certain adrenaline boost, and you do not feel so nervous any longer. You start to fly at your pleasure. Often enemies fire a missile at you. Either a controller tells you from the ground, or by certain gauges in the plane, you see that you have been attacked with 1, 2, sometimes 3 missiles. And some people had up to 7 rockets fired at them simultaneously. And when you start to dodge and pull to get away from missiles, you do it with a little bit of pleasure. You're not tense, you have to be relaxed. As a pilot, you know, you have to be relaxed. You can't get tense in an airplane. However, such an adrenaline rush at these moments also happens. What's the maximum speed you ever reached? Our maximum speed is measured in Mach number, because it doesn't make sense to read it in kilometers. It's related to the speed of sound. I've exceeded beyond 2 speeds of sound. So you were going beyond 2 speeds of sound, and at that point, what did it feel like at 2 speeds of sound? It's very noisy in the airplane. When you go over the speed of sound, you have such a dead silence, and it's just a delight. Is it even deader or the same when it is twice as much? No, it's the same. After the transition through Mach 1, all the sound stays behind. Okay, here's the thing. It sounds terrible on the one hand. When you get shot at by missiles, you get away from missiles. After all, I'm interested in the emotional part of it. Here's a big, expansive, powerful jet equipped with the modern weapons and all that stuff. There has to be some superhuman robot to fly it, right? Who's in charge of everything. To all that mentioned, I see a young, good-looking guy smiling next to me. I want to know the technical specifications and the pilot's emotions. Here you've dodged the rocket, exhaled, and then... Well, you never fly away from a rocket, because you're doing a mission, and the rocket is part of the mission. You go on, and you advance, tick a box, and say, "Okay, gun, next." So you understand that in 2 minutes, in a minute, in 30 seconds, there could be another launch, but you have to move on. You don't think about it, although I say that now, sitting here, it was terrifying the first time. And when you are told from the ground, for example, a missile is closing in an extremely low altitude or maximum speed, increase thrust and go away. It is scary, we are afraid. We had minimal experience flying an airplane to get away from the missiles back then. Now, at the level where I am not that nervous, but the first experience was terrifying. And when they said the missile was gone, or the missile didn't make it, you exhaled so much, made a turn, and worked again. All my life I have admired airplanes. I love aircraft and their beauty, and I think planes are generally beautiful. Maybe someone will disagree with me, but that's my opinion. And warplanes have always had a special place, because this power, this might, and beauty united in one airplane, it always delighted me. And what I admire most of all are the guys who fly these planes. What they're doing now is above all praise. We want to help them somehow. We all want to help these guys, whose duty is a marvelous feat. We want to raise the money to buy an airplane. It's an ambitious plan, but we want to buy a fighter jet and give it to our pilots so they can keep doing these miracles. We need that feeling of support and contribution to our joint victory. We're going to buy a fighter jet. Buy me a fighter jet, link in the description. These, as far as I understand, are decoys that are fired back? Yes, when heat-seeking missiles are flying at us. This system is designed to distract the guidance tracker to those targets. The combustion temperature of these decoys is very high, more than the combustion temperature of the fuel, and the missile goes off on it. And here, I suppose, is the braking parachute. Yes, there are two braking parachutes packed here. The landing speed is very high, and as the plane is heavy, it has to be stopped. Because the brakes overheat, they don't always do their job, and you need two brake parachutes to stop this big plane. Okay, what speed do you keep on the glide path? Our speed on the glide path is about 250 miles. On touchdown, it's about 190 miles. Do you feel a different pilot compared to yourself on February 23rd? They are completely different pilots. Those tasks and the psychological resilience level back then are completely different from what I am capable of now. And those ways of flying when we thought we were preparing for combat missions, they are in the past. Everything has changed completely. The way we fly is very different now. Okay, do you fly solo or in pairs more often? Depending on the combat mission. There are missions when you fly on your own, and there are missions when 4 to 6 planes are flying in formation. Together with the commanders, we decide how many planes we need for a particular mission. The pilot's main question. You talk about the 4-hour duration. Was there a situation when you had to make a quicker turn, stop, and jump out to the bathroom? Yes, there was an occasion. I was flying L-39 as a cadet. I wanted to go to the bathroom. The tower cleared me to downwind from the ground, and it's a little farther. But I had an urgent need, and I had to cut corners to make a straight approach. They asked me if something was wrong. I said it was fine. When I landed and was taxiing to the ramp, a fire truck pulled up next to me, and medical assistance came in as there was concerns about my health. I didn't even make it to the parking stand. I turned the engine off, jumped off, and then had to taxi back to my stand. How many speeding tickets do you get a month or so? Depends on the situation. I drive very carefully when there are cameras. We have amazing apps that show you where the cameras are, and I don't want to advertise it, you know. We may not have the most powerful car, but with 400 horsepower, we couldn't catch up to you. Normally, when I don't fly for a month or a couple of weeks, I don't have enough adrenaline. I want to do something reckless like that. When you fly, there's enough adrenaline. But of course, we're all men and sometimes you want to push the pedal. But in general, when you get to a plane, a training flight, you're flying in a training area, not on a combat mission. Then what is it like? There's always this desire to make a sharp turn, even when flying a combat mission. In one case, we were flying 3 planes on a combat mission at a relatively low altitude, about 160 feet. We were flying a triangle formation. 2 aircraft were exactly at 160 feet, and I was flying with terrain avoidance at about 10 feet. And there was a moment that I saw the mast and thought, gosh, that was low. I looked to my right, and it felt like the engineer intake was about to cut the tulips on the field, and I climbed a bit. And the other pilots were joking that we were flying normally, and Andrei, as always, a weirdo. Our viewers don't realize that even 160 feet it's very low. Yes, at 550 miles it is very close and dangerous, but there is no other way. And what was the maximum altitude you reached in SU-27? I was at 50,000 feet. 50,000 feet? Yeah. Did you see the stars? Yes, it was daytime and the sky was so dark already, a completely different feeling. Even the controls of the plane behaved completely differently. How does it behave at that altitude? I wouldn't say it's sluggish, but there's a relatively small delay in steering, and you have to control carefully because the instrument speed, that is, the speed relative to the airflow, is very low. Have you flown with one engine? Yes, there were occasions when I turned off the engine and flew with one engine. And how does the plane fly with one engine? Very stable, enough thrust to fly horizontally. There is a slight turn in moment of force because the engines are big and far from symmetry axis. You need to correct with pedals, but it flies well with one engine. If an engine fails on a takeoff at full load, will one engine do the job? One engine is enough, but you have to compensate for lateral momentum with differential braking. What is the thrust of one engine? 12.5 tons on Afterburner, so that's a total of 25 tons of thrust. And what is the mass of the aircraft? The mass of the aircraft can be from 20 tons to 29.9 tons. Given that mass and weight are different parameters, what was the maximum G-force you experienced on it? I had a maximum of 9 Gs. At what mass? It was at 20 tons. So that means the weight was 180 tons. Yes. How long can you withstand high G-forces? I don't want to lie, and I didn't have it for very long, about 3 seconds. I had to turn around very quickly and get away. We can maneuver for about 20 seconds with an overload of 7 to 8 units. Were you in the G suite? Yes, in the suite. Without the suite it's hard. 6 Gs are already tough to bear. Tell me about the difference between close combat and long-range combat. Have you experienced close combat? Yes, I have. I was involved in close and long-range combat. Flying a plane in close combat is nothing like they show us about all those turns and barrel rolls in the movies. Now, the main objective is not to get into close combat because there are medium and long-range missiles. Why get into close combat when you can fire a missile from 30 miles away, fly away, turn around, and fire another missile from 30 miles away? So you fire it and forget it if it's a guided missile. What if it's a missile that needs line-of-sight beam guidance? Exactly, long-range missiles require line-of-sight beam guidance. You lock on the target and point a dedicated beam at it, because the aircraft can maneuver. If the missile were not prompted where the target was, it would lose it at that long a distance. I'm figuring out how to say it in plain language. There is a specific beam of radiation detected by the missile after it hits the target and deflects from it, right? Suppose a target is flying, and the aircraft that intercepts it directs a beam at that target to be destroyed. The interceptor jet transmits target information to the missile in the form of range and angle to the target, and the missile is thus aimed at that target. The principle is similar to getting lit with a laser pointer. What do you think and what do you say when you hit a target and miss it? I remember my first downed plane, and I reacted very emotionally. I was glad, I shrieked and flew on, and I was guided to the next target. The first plane I shot down was a real surge of emotion. It was relatively close, and I could see the moment the missile hit and that flash. It was a bomber Su-24 attack aircraft. The Su-24, they go low, right? Yes, it was going at extremely low altitude, approaching a firing course towards one of the big cities. I intercepted it before it even got there. That's great. What about the moments when you missed it? When I miss a target, I get upset, but not too much, because I've still got missiles, as experience shows. What about missiles? There are heat-seeking missiles, there are radar-guided missiles. At what speed does the missile fly? About 2 speeds of sound. How much is that on average? About 1,600 miles per hour, depending on altitude. And when you get away, do you see the missile flying by? Most of the time, I don't see because they're launched from a long distance, and you make an invasive maneuver for the missile to lose its kinetic energy. Do you have to let it get close to you and make an evasive maneuver? Depending on which missile. And how do you know which missile? That's something I can't tell you. Where do the missiles that don't hit anything fly? They fall to the ground. If the rocket loses speed, it falls and sinks into the ground like a dummy. Shouldn't it explode? Theoretically, yes, but experience shows a lot of Russian fallen rockets are found that didn't explode. Does it explode from a collision with an airplane, or is the mechanism different? Look, there are different kinds of contact and non-contact detonators. There is the principle of the detonator, which reacts to the proximity of the target, information about which is transmitted by a special signal. The task of the missile is to explode nearby and scatter shrapnel, a small metal or non-metal particles that look like bolts or balls. At high speed, they tear the airplane apart and penetrate all the compartments. That's how the missile works. Can I get some specifics on the aerodynamics of this jet? As far as I know, it's aerodynamically unstable. Yes, it's aerodynamically unstable. This means that the rudders are deflecting and trying to keep it balanced in flight. There are aerodynamic surfaces such as slats, ailerons, flaperons, and rudders for this purpose. I understand why it is unstable. It has to be as maneuverable as possible, and it has an offset center of mass. Yes, the aerodynamics focus is not in the center of mass. For viewers, let me explain in simple language. When you fly a paper airplane, it flies straight. This is a stable airplane. When an airplane is unstable, it keeps trying to get to critical angles of attack, turning and spinning. There is no level flight. The electric remote control system ensures smooth and stable flight, which stabilizes the airplane by constantly moving all control surfaces. But when necessary, the pilot can quickly execute the sharpest maneuver. This is a peculiar element, which I mistakenly called slats, but it's not slats. What is its unique feature, and how does it differ from the standard slats? The feature is that when the aircraft maneuvers at certain angles of attack, this control surface changes the angle itself, thanks to a system that constantly calculates the angle for optimum airflow to the wing profile. So you're saying it's the airplane constantly changing the wing profile? Yes, pretty much all the time, except in horizontal flight. With the advent of new technology, there are drones that handle certain tasks, but pilots flying airplanes face other tasks. What's your take on that, and why aren't they interchangeable? Because warfare is a set of systems that conduct the same mission. For example, you can't fire an air-to-air missile from a drone, hitting a target at 50 miles, but it can strike a missile accurately outside the range of an air defense system. In some cases, you can use drones. In other cases, you can't. This is an integrated system dealing with specific combat missions, and all factors have to be taken into account to decide where a drone might be helpful and where it might not. In some cases, they can be shut down. They usually fly at high altitudes, and you need to get close to some targets unnoticed. It's a joint mission, and we don't just need drones, we need various aircraft. If only one drone like the Bayraktar flies, it has no cover. Yes, it hits its target accurately. It does a great job. Air defense systems don't always cover it. Not all air defense system can see it. It needs to be backed up because any fighter can close in at distance of 60 miles to lock on it and shoot it down. Fighter aviation is required to cover it. Helicopters can cover it, but you cannot protect helicopters with the Bayraktar. Which missiles do you use on the jet? At the moment, we use air-to-air missiles, and we can also launch air-to-surface missiles, throw bombs, launch unguided missiles, and guided missiles like the ones you see. We have medium-range radar missiles and short-range infrared missiles there. The heat-seeking missiles work on a shoot-it-and-forget-it basis, while the radar missiles require a radar-seek and continuous illumination. Daniel asks me a persistent question. What happens if you drop a missile on the ground? Nothing will happen. It has certain switches. When you fire the missile, you activate these switches, and at a certain distance to the target which the pilot sets, it explodes. There are special devices to make it safe. Does it become dangerous only when it's gone? Yes. When the missile is launched, there is a detonator activated by the pilot and it goes off. And how does a missile launch feel? Depends on the suspension point of the missile. There are scenarios when the missile is thrown off and falls, and sometimes the missile leaves the wing right away. There's not much difference, a little bump and you see a white trail behind the missile. What dangerous moments have you had in civilian life and military life? It is clear that there were more dangerous moments in military life. There was an engine failure on the Has-30 plane in a peacetime during one of my first flights. No big deal, I landed. It wasn't very comforting, but I made it through. Was everything intact? Yes, it happened on the glide path. I slightly undershot and landed 5 meters outside the threshold. There were a lot of dangerous situations during the war. Some of them were my fault. Once at an altitude of 1,000 feet, I fell out of the clouds with a dive angle of almost 90 degrees. 90 degrees at 500 miles per hour, flying just vertically to the ground. That's crazy. How did you manage to pull out and level off the plane? And what was the G-force? I don't know what the G-force was, but I pulled the plane as hard as possible to avoid crashing. The G-force was excessive, but I didn't care at that time. How was it? Suddenly the ground grew all over the windshield. Well, yeah, I didn't expect that. At one point I thought, why me? Why so fast, Andrew? That's a moment I'll never forget. With my peripheral vision, I saw houses flying by. After catching my breath for a couple of minutes, they started to direct me to the target again. I say, no, give me just a minute. I will fly horizontally for a while. I turned around, calmed down, and got back to work. What was the biggest misbehavior? What if my boss will see me? We're going to blur your face. Can I not answer that question? Did you enjoy it? Yes, of course, I was satisfied. Love it, practice it, and can do it. Have you had visual contact with an enemy aircraft? Yes, there was visual contact, but it was more of a silhouette. The enemies came in a huge group to us, and we were all in air combat. He was right above us. Not me personally, but one of the pilots saw him. We were flying in pairs. He fired a missile at the enemy, the second one, and we were off. I wasn't attacking, distracting instead. Visual contact is more of an exception, more in the early days of the war. But generally speaking, I take it that modern combat doesn't have that classic scenario that we're used to. The planes spinning around and following each other. Not at all. Air defense, that's the word, scary or not? Of course it's scary. It's scary either way when they fire a missile at you. Okay, SU-27 versus S-300. Depends on whether you're expecting a missile or not, and the range to the missile. Some cases prove that getting away from the S-300 is possible. Possible? And from a book? Also possible. And which one is more dangerous, the S-300 or the Buk? Both are dangerous. If you're flying and you enter the detection zone, you most often expect missiles to be launched at you, but you don't know at what point. You take action to keep yourself and the plane safe, get away from the missile and complete the mission. It's difficult, but it's possible in my experience and that of my comrades. You don't smoke? No. And judging by your shape, you work out. Yes. Okay, here you are. Your job is quite nerve-wracking, to say the least. A little bit. You're done for the day at your service. There is no advertisement, but how do you deal with stress? How do you get rid of it all? I periodically go to the chin-up bar, the uneven bars. I don't do weightlifting because there are nuances. After an intense workout, you're left with tightness in your muscles. You need a very high sensitivity of the hands because on the landing, the necessary movement of the yoke is from 1 to 1.5 inches. You have to feel it. After training, the muscles are stiff and you don't feel this movement. Flying the plane gets worse and more uncomfortable. All in all, that kind of training doesn't do you any good. Did you ever get sick while flying? Yes, I did. Usually when I fly as an instructor in the back or during uneventful flights. For example, ferrying the plane or flying the route. You trimmed the airplane, monitoring instruments as the plane is rocking and swaying. Sometimes you feel sick at such moments, but it just disappears when you take the controls. Have you experienced Deicing? Yes. How bad was it, and how does the SU-27 cope with icing? It's not a big problem for the Su-27. But there is a nuance on the ground. The air intake grids start picking ice and chunks of ice get into the engines. If you fly and experience icing, you increase your speed to 560 miles and it disappears. It's more dangerous on landing and the ground, but dangerous for the aircraft mostly. Is there an anti-icing system on the windshield? For what? There is a system, but increase the speed and it's all gone. Is it cold to fly in winter? It's not cold, but if the plane is parked for a while, especially at minus 15 to 20 degrees, it's metal, you get in and it gets a little chilly. But as soon as you start the engines and close the canopy, you're fine and you can stay comfortable. Even though the Su-27 is a pressurized airplane, you fly with a mask put on for safety reasons. Do you breathe oxygen? Yes. It's almost a drug, right? Well, yes. When we suffer from G-forces, we increase the oxygen ratio in the mask on purpose not to lose consciousness. Also, above a certain altitude, it's no longer mixed oxygen, but pure oxygen that's fed into the mask. Have you ever run to a plane and breathed pure oxygen when tired? No, but there were times when you were tired, don't get enough sleep, got on the plane and immediately turned on the oxygen supply. It all goes away. Like the Red Bull commercial says, it gives you wings. Thank you, Andrei, for the interesting interview. We are just having fun, talking and smiling now, but that's the hard truth. You do a remarkable feat with a smile on your face. Thank you so much for that. If this format gains an audience, we'll do interviews and talk. Thank you very much. See you at the airfield. The Su-27 is waiting for us there. Everything as agreed. We are waiting for the end of the war.